I believe my name is Chris Robinson. I am the Senior Art Director on World of Warcraft. I mean, the challenge there was that we had these established few that people knew to be, what you would expect if you said, like, you're a paladin and you're going to get the most epic paladin weapon you can possibly imagine. I kind of know what that is. But if you're saying, okay, you're a rogue and there are these daggers, I mean, some people might think like, oh, Corona's daggers, that would kind of make sense. But there's then the other specs that we had to kind of fill out. So a lot of that was trial and error through the concept process, and we're actually showing quite a bit of that here, and I think we're going to start to showing more and more of the thought process behind how we got from, specifically in the cases of we have no idea what we're going to do, to okay, now it feels like it's entrenched in lore and it fits in that within that scope that we were going for with the other weapons that were well known. So a lot of that process was just kind of us working back and forth with design to go, hey, here's what we think. They'll say, all right, here's the story of a couple of them. Here's how we think the main theme is going to work out and what the spec, kind of each spec might be. And then we'll take a crack, do some sketches, send it back to them, be like, here's what we're thinking, how we're going to pull in some of the themes that you're talking about per spec. And then they'll come back and go, yeah, that's working. It doesn't quite feel like, if you look at it next to Ashbringer, it doesn't feel like it has the same visual level of epic appeal that might have. So how can we bring in, Ashbringer has like a little floaty coin that's above it. So that's, a key that it's obviously a little bit of a higher level weapon than you might think of when you think about just a general sword. So a lot of that was just pulling in and trying to make sure that we were using the weapons that were known and the obvious ones as visual cues to kind of inform the design of the ones that weren't necessarily so obvious. Yeah, that was a really interesting process, man. It was, like I said, it was a lot of back and forth, and that was kind of the fun part of it, like really trying to find that balance between what felt really core to the class and the spec, but also pulled in the aspect of whatever we were trying to reference in the world. A big part of that was really just, I mean, interestingly enough, if you look at Ashbringer, it really isn't necessarily, and using that again as an example, it's not necessarily one of the most epic weapons visually that we have in the game. I mean, we've gone way crazier since then on an aesthetic level with these weapons. So what actually ended up happening was that when we were starting to work on newer weapons that weren't necessarily established in lore and story, it wasn't necessarily even a situation of trying to make them match Ashbringer. We actually found that we had to go above and beyond that. Because if we had something that, say, was like Garona's dagger or another one of the lesser known artifact weapons, and we actually used those visual cues and said, like, okay, what's the primary part of the weapon that makes up the main part of the story? That typically was what's the class and what's the spec? And that was a great opportunity to really hone in on that stuff. Like oftentimes when we're working on armor sets or weapons, we can kind of get a little crazy because we've done that so many times with armor. There's only so many ways you can make a cloth armor set before you start adding in, like, okay, how much metal can we put in this before people call, BS and go, okay, it's not necessarily a cloth armor set anymore. So with these artifact weapons, maintaining that core class fantasy was such a great part, like it was such a great stepping point, like a jumping off point to go, okay, we know that we're really going to hone in on the shamanistic hammer that's like dripping, magma stuff and looks like it's just the core of the heart of the world if you tore it out, and we're wielding it as a hammer. There's always a trade-off, it always feels like we have that one primary feature that is the thing that we're going to spend the most bucks on when it comes to our character team. And certainly the player characters were kind of the big thing in Draenor, and we really wanted to make sure that came across. I mean, that whole goal was make sure it feels relative to what people know, and just, it looks higher fidelity. Like if you weren't necessarily paying attention, you'd just be like, wow, that looks exactly like my character. It's just I'm more focused in on it now. That same theme comes up quite a bit when we're talking about whether it be like druid forums, the new druid forums, or Naga or anything where we have these characters that are existing in the world, and every time you go stand up next to them, and probably the redone or reworked player character models exacerbated the problem of them feeling like they were really old visually compared to what we're seeing now. So that actually was kind of, once we finish that off, we kind of take a look at like, okay, now Demon Hunters are going to be, that whole kit was so huge compared to anything, even like the Death Knight. When we started working on Demon Hunters, we said, let's take a look at Death Knight and use that as a jumping off point, but we want Demon Hunters to be that plus, 30% or whatever. And so we started talking about those assets and people and everything that we worked with on the player character rework, and those are the kind of things that we can go, okay, we really want to focus those guys on this stuff now. So the presentation where this is the key art and this is what we build off of is a very cleaned up version of the chaos that happens throughout the actual creative process. And I don't say that to say that we're necessarily disorganized. It's more to say that we are at any point willing to reiterate and improve on where we're at. And so many times we'll hit the concept right off the bat, and we'll go into it knowing, okay, we know what we want. So say for instance, we know what this to be we want Broken Shores to be a wasteland, like desolate wasteland. Maybe it's, so the sea floor has been risen and you're seeing like deep sea creatures and things that are, I don't know, whatever, like, the landscape is bleak and whatever. There's always a way that you can spin that visually to where it's compelling, but not something that you maybe necessarily want to spend a lot of time in. So what allows us to do is kind of iterate then and then go, okay, we know we want this one area to be very bleak and desolate, but in order for it to feel that way, we want to make sure that we're coming out of an area that's really beautiful and feels like some place that you want to spend a lot of time in. So what'll happen is we'll do some initial concept work, and we'll say, okay, this feels like the direction that we want to go in. It may not necessarily be the exact perfect, yes, we know that can be the end finished product, but it's a good initial direction. And we'll build some of it out. We'll start playing around a little with, actually getting in game and playing around, looking at the forums, getting the sense of just actually the vibe and what you feel when you're in that environment. And that's when that kind of, sometimes the chaos happens where the initial concept, we'll all sit down and go like, you know what? This is not working at all. Like we're not feeling, it feels too bleak. It doesn't feel like we're necessarily setting the stage in a way that we want to. So we'll go back to the drawing board and go, what can we do necessarily? Like we don't want to wipe the entire vibe and the entire thing that we're going with here. So what can we pull in or change that might add that extra element, or the things that will really hone it in to be one of the really epic environments that we like to kind of, everything we want to have, we want it to be someplace that you want to spend a lot of time in and just check out. And our team, as the art team, the goal is kind of funny because we're almost contrary to the design goal of keeping you focused and on task. Like it's my favorite thing if people get off task and they just kind of end up looking all around and going like, wow, this is the coolest place I've ever. And then Tom slaps me in the back of the head and goes, no, make him play the game. Pay attention. Oh, I'm sure, man. There's a ton of things that we work on that, like, it's the whole thing. We don't want to draw your attention to every single thing. Like there should be things in the world that you just naturally look past. And if you do that, we've done our job. But having said that, definitely, it's very difficult to get people to look up, specifically if you're zooming out. I mean, a lot of players play from the max view so that they get, they can see everything around them. And in that case, you're really looking primarily down. I mean, your camera's like almost touching the ceiling at that point, just looking down. So we're always doing things now to try to think about how can we actually add that detail down lower into the area. So like if you're running through a dungeon, we'll have, instead of having a really ornate ceiling, we might break the walls out or have you cross a bridge so that you're actually looking down and seeing the detail around the area down below you to tell the story rather than having to, have you kind of look up. Because we can't really put a bunch of arrows in the ground to kind of be like, look up. My favorite thing that I've ever worked on was actually for Blizzcon a long time ago. It was the Murloc suit. Justin Tavarat, who was the art director before me, actually concepted it, and I got to build it when I first kind of started. It was a little bit after I started. And that, besides the fact it was just a fun creature, and it's made out of socks and materials that are fun to render and paint, it's near and dear to me because we were working with the Make-A-Wish Foundation at the time, and a kid called Ezra came in, and he his dream was to make video games. He liked design and art. So he sat with all of us and kind of we showed him what we were doing. And I was actually in the middle of building that model when he came by. And so if you look on the base of his, where his costume comes down, that has the zipper in the back of it, and you can kind of see his boxers showing through, his heart boxers. There's a zipper, the actual tab on the zipper has his initials. So he actually got to draw those into the texture. So it's still to this day, if you look at it, it's his initials on the zipper. Those are my only two options. Oh, Lily. Man.
UFO Commander, we are the future. We're gonna take you to the future. Then we're gonna get to the future, where everyone talks like they're from the future. UFO Commander, we are the future. We're gonna take you to the future. Then we're gonna get to the future, where everyone talks like they're from the future. Hello there, old spore. Me, just got the number one out of the plan. The bee's knees, the tip-top shape, I'm swell shape, and I can make a fortune for my ass for just the balls up. UFO Commander, we are the future. We're gonna take you to the future. Then we're gonna get to the future. Where everyone talks like they're from. Drop the balls up! UFO Commander, we are the future. We're gonna take you to the future. Then we're gonna get to the future. Where everyone talks like they're from. Drop the balls up! Give me that! No! No! No!